Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of T.N.T. Garage and Performance. And today we're back on the chassis project for the Checker. And I've got steel and everything we need to finish it up. Maybe even get it in the paint so it's 100% done. How much stuff do I have for this? I'll show you right now. Between all the scrap steel, I've got a steering box mount. I've got shock mounts. I've got an engine travel limiter. Hell, I've even got balloons. So let's get this party started and let's get to it. Well, now that we got the front end off, the first thing we're going to do is kind of mock in our steering box. So we got the bracket bolted to the box, and since I haven't purchased a pitman arm yet because I don't know exactly what I need, I went to YouTube's favorite engineering school of CAD, which is cardboard aided design, and just made kind of a stand-in pitman arm that measures the same as a Vega pitman arm center to center. And it'll give me an accurate representation of where I need it to be, plus I could move it around. Also, what I did was I took my fence post tie rod here and turned it into a fence post drag link. And I'll bring you guys in once I kind of get this set up. But I've got it going to the spindle on that side, and we're going to run it above the leaf spring. Now, when I go to set this in, because there's not the entire weight of the car on the chassis, we have most of the engine, most of the body, all that stuff, but we're probably going to gain another 400 pounds, 500 pounds on the front of this car. So we're going to account for that by angling the drag link up a little bit, sloping down from this side of the chassis to the passenger side wheel. So what we want to determine is, one, where we have room to put our steering box, because we have the leaf spring mount and bolt here, the engine plate, which we could trim some of this, but I think a good spot for it is going to be in this general area, and using our mocked up pitman arm, we can see if we're going to be parallel with the axle with our drag link, which we are in this particular position, and what kind of pitman arm I want to use. So let me see if I can get this clamped into place quick, and we can get deep and dirty into this. All right, so just got it clamped into place, and I can get all the way around this leaf spring nut for the bolt, and we're just going to kind of look at where we got to go with our drag link. So right here, the drag link is level, and if we move the bolt out of our makeshift pitman arm here, kind of move it up, at dead level, a straight pitman arm would work. And I even think putting a little bit of angle in it to account for the weight, we might actually, well, we'll do this because that represents the bottom. Just kind of looking at it, we got a slight angle here, and just kind of checking. I might actually go with a 2-inch drop pitman arm, and that I can put it on upside down essentially, and should be able to clear everything and also bring this up where I need it to be. So if we ran it like that, I honestly think that would work quite well right there. So obviously this isn't pushed all the way up in, and we can put the heim joint either on top or on the bottom of the pitman arm. But I think a 2-inch drop pitman arm flipped upside down is going to be what we need. But other than that, this steering box is pretty much in the exact position I need it to be right here. We clear the spring bolt. We're not going to have any interference from the leaf spring to the mounting bolt. I can get to both mounting bolts from the bracket to the box. So I'm going to make some marks, and we got to do a little extra fabrication to add some steel to this frame rail to make everything work. So let me do that quick, make some marks, and I'll kind of bring you in here and get you rolling in my head of what I'm thinking. All right, getting you down in here. Like I said, I know this isn't pushed all the way up on the splines, but it's going to be pretty much like that, which would give us a 2-inch drop pitman arm that'd be flipped over. And you can see it's just going uphill a little bit. We're going to clear our leaf spring, and that'll make sure as the axle goes up and down, our drag link won't contact the leaf spring, and the tie rod bar will go underneath the springs. Now over here, it's going to take a little fabrication, because you can see that I've got this spaced up quite a bit to clear the spring. I thought about going under the spring with the drag link, but honestly, I want this tucked up out of the way. And what I'll do, since this is a cast steel spindle, we can make a gusset and a spacer here, run a bolt through it so we don't have to stack a ton of misalignment spacers and make it all wobbly. It'll be nice and strong, and it'll be able to withstand all the pressure of steering the vehicle. So obviously we'd heat this up and then make some brackets to come up and capture everything with spacers down here. And that's something I'll have one of my friends weld for me with a bigger welder and much more experience welding cast steel. So that will come when we're ready to do the final steering linkage. But as far as where the box is, I think we're good right there. So I need to notch our motor plate a little bit. And also you can see that the box is a little cocked, because this spring perch actually kind of juts out from the frame a little bit. So we're going to plate the frame with this 1/8 inch flat stock I have, and we'll cut out a piece to slide behind the bracket, and also punch holes in it, rosette weld it to the frame, perimeter weld it to the frame, and then that'll be our mounting location for our box. And then once we get the plate in, we can weld down to the spring perch here. Like I said, plenty of room to get to this. You'd have to loosen it, pull the bolt out that way, but it can be done. Over on this side, we got plenty of room for both bolts. It's not going to interfere with the spring, and we can put a gusset in right there to also strengthen our mount. So having it plated and gusseted will keep it from trying to twist or bow the frame in and out. So let's get to fabricating our piece of flat stock to weld into the frame. All right, we've got our new plates welded to the frame. I actually decided to go with 3/16 steel, which got me lined up perfectly to this leaf spring mount. So we're gonna get the box set into where it needs to be. I also notched my motor plate a little bit and the motor plate mount to clear the front of the steering box. Also, I'm going to do a little more clearancing right here on this nub of the steering box, so when I put it in, I can still get to this bolt. And I'm also going to put this bolt in the other way, so you can actually get the bolt out to get the motor plate out. So let's get our clamp ready. I'm going to clamp the box where it needs to be and tack the mount into place, remove the box, and then weld the plate into place. That's held in enough. Now I can remove the box, which is just these 2 bolts I can still get at. And we can go ahead and buzz the plate in to my plate that's on the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll check back in with you. Well, we got our steering box mount welded in. Next thing we're going to move on to is shock mounts. Now, as far as the upper mount, I actually got these for a Jeep axle that would otherwise weld to the axle, but these will be my standoff mounts right here. And of course, I'll bevel them so they fit the frame nicely and gusset them. But as far as putting a shock mount on an axle like this, when you have leaf springs clear out here, obviously most gassers, the axle comes out, the spindle starts around here, so you have plenty of room. Another idea would be to inboard the shocks, but I really don't want to do that. I want the shocks as far out as possible. So if I mount these out there on the frame, I have an idea for the lower shock mount, and that is these that were originally for the sway bar on a Jeep axle. So if I were to obviously grind, fit, clean up, and put these down here, whichever orientation works best, after I look up a couple lengths of shocks and weld this on, this will make for a good shock mount, because that's a 1/2 inch hole, and I could put a shock stud in there so the shock would mount to the outside, go up to the frame, have it straight up and down. So that's my idea on that. So I'm going to clean up one of these and see if I can make my brain work a little bit. Now that I've got the lower shock mounts on the bandsaw cutting, I figure I'll start working on my engine travel limiter. Now, what is an engine travel limiter? Seriously, I'm asking. I really didn't know what one of these was before I decided to run motor plates. And what it is you have a bracket that bolts to the motor mount saddle on the engine, and this adjustable bar that goes between the engine and where you weld the mount to the frame. And that keeps the engine from moving back and forth, because your plates will never hold it still, especially if you launch hard, wheelie, come down hard. So this way we can keep the engine in check. Now, it came as a kit, and I'll have to weld these bungs inside this tube, which is fine, but I'm also going to drill a hole through the tube to rosette weld it. So in case this outer perimeter weld fails, we'll have that secondary weld inside there. So I'm going to get this prepped, ready, and we'll buzz it together and then get it set up in the chassis. Well, all right, now we're ready to get our engine travel limiter installed. Now, this kit I got from Summit, and pretty good kit. It's an aluminum piece here, real nice pieces otherwise. The only thing I noticed with my big block is I had to wallow out the holes just a little bit to get it to line up with all the bolt holes on the block. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt this plate to the block, and they supply all the bolts and everything, all the hardware you're going to need. And this clevis here, I've just got snug into the mount plate. That way I can position it where I need it to be, so we get our final landing here. Go ahead and snug it to the block. We can grab our link here, which has 2 tabs that you're supposed to weld to your frame. So that thing's actually pretty warm. I'm going to put some gloves on. So you can see I plug welded it and welded around the perimeter of it. So now I can take my bolt, lose that nut forever, and slide our rod end into our mount there. And as far as Getting it back here. Want to get it as level as I can so the force is only back and forth. We're not getting a jouncing force. So I've just got it set up on the frame here where I cleaned it up. And one thing you want to do too is thread your rod ends out on each end. They're right and left hand threads, so you can turn the center and adjust your tension on it. I put about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch of adjustability out so I can kind of fine tune this, but I'm going to go ahead and stick the welder at this and get it tacked in and finish welded. And then this is a pretty quick project in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to get this tacked in. Well, there we go. As you can see, I've got this tacked in. That's our shear mount there. Holds one rod end, goes to the engine, and then you can adjust this to tension or move the engine fore and aft and get it just right so you're not warping your plates. So that'll hold it pretty good. Now, actually, I could probably pull the motor out because I'm not going to need it in here for anything else. We've got our travel limiter in, motor plates are done. We've got the steering box bracket on, so I could get this out of here and then I can get in to all these places and finish weld real nicely, because I'm also, once I get the shock mounts done, we're going to drop the axle and leaf springs out and finish welding on the axle, and then get all these finish welding on the frame, as far as getting cross members in here as well. Okay, well, got all the hard work of getting these made into shock mounts. I got them ground down so they'll conform to the axle, got them cleaned up, and now it's time to determine where they're going to sit. Now, I looked at quite a few shocks, and I think the one I'm going to go with is like a short drag shock, which has an overall extended length of 14.5 inches. Now, I pretty much know my point up here is going to be about 1.5 inches above the frame. Down here, however, I need to figure out just at what angle these need to sit, because I could put these in any orientation I want. So I'm going to want right about there. If I put it at 13 inches to the frame, right to the center of the hole down here, that's going to be the perfect location for me to weld this in order to mount a shock and have it not top out when the front end comes off the ground. And that's a good thing to not do, is top or bottom out your shocks. So these guys will be able to weld right to the tube, and the way I'm going to do that, because this is a thick piece of cast steel, is I'm going to heat it about as hot as I possibly can with the propane torch and buzz it into place. I'm going to do one side first, and then once that angle is established, we'll match it to the other side, and then we can do our upper mounts. Well, this is exactly why you kind of take your time when you're doing stuff that, well, you know, you're pretty much the only one doing it, especially with a build like this that's not a Tri-5 frame, not something that's done every day. I was looking at my shock location, which I'm going to use this piece of pipe to illustrate it. It's a little bit bigger than the shock, which will give me an air gap. So if I mount the shock here and I decide to, I don't know, put brakes on the car, I can get a caliper on there, but we're going to run the risk of bashing the caliper into the shock. So that's not good. The solution is to pivot this lower shock mount up higher, which will actually do a couple things for me. Number one, if you guys can see in here, is not only can I weld it to the axle tube now, I can weld it to the spring perch, which should give me a lot more stability on it. And it is going to raise it quite a bit. Now that kind of presents a problem when it comes to mounting the top of the shock. So my initial plan was to have these angled so it look nice, work well, and then once I pivot that up, I don't have enough material here to make this work. So then I thought, well, it is pretty wide between the springs. I could inboard the shocks and not have an issue with its stability by flipping it around like that, putting the shocks on the inside. That worked great if I never wanted to steer the car, because the steering shaft would be, well, going through where the shock would need to be if I inboarded them. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just trim these nubs off of here, and we're gonna mount these just like this, and then have two gussets coming from the top down to the chassis to make everything strong. And of course, the shocks I'm using don't have the upper body, it's just the shaft of the piston. It'll fit in there perfect, we won't have any interference, and it'll raise the shock up out of the way so the caliper won't come into contact with it. We won't have any worries about the tire hitting it, nothing like that. We'll still have outboard shocks. So by mounting this here and mounting my lower shock mount there, we get to where we need to be. So let's keep rolling. Well, I got my upper shock mount here on the driver's side. I already did the passenger side, but we got it gusseted. And of course, I'll trim them little ears off there. But that'll work out with this guy going right there with the studs straight up to there. That should solve all of our shock absorber woes. There you go. That'll give you a better idea right there. We'll have the shock stud coming out this way so the shock will slide on. Plenty of clearance coming up. Go in there, cross bolt, and we're good to go. With it turned 90 degrees of each other, it should give it plenty of room to flex and move and whatever it needs to do. So shock mounts are done. Now I will probably work on these frame horns, because we got the steering box bracket in, we got the motion limiter in, and now I want to do like any other gasser where you have the frame horns kind of come down like that. We'll have a cross member here that I got to measure for, which go to a friend's tonight, get it made, and then we're going to have a cross member go from frame rail to frame rail under the engine, and then we're going to fabricate the trans cross member tonight. So let's keep working. All right, well, I'm going to get ready to start doing the frame horn extensions on this chassis. So we're going to go back to the cardboard and we're going to draw out kind of the shape we want to have on this, and I'm going to have them slope down a bit and essentially have a front bumper that's a little lower. And it's also the classic look you see on a lot of gassers where the front of the frame angles down a little bit. So just take our cardboard and we'll kind of trace how we want it. I'm going to have it come 6.5 inches out, which I've got marked right here, and we'll just figure out an angle that looks nice enough to work. So if we bring it down like that, and then mark where the bottom of our tube is, and we know we're coming here. So that's generally the angle I want. And I've got enough extra pipe laying around it. This will be the end, the round point, so we'll have it come to that round point, and of course have a bar in between the frame horn. So I'll kind of sketch this up quick, and then we'll transfer it to metal. Also, I've got all my identical pieces made, and basically how they're going to go on is just like that on both sides to extend it out. But what I'm going to do, because the frame actually angles in like this as it comes forward, is I'm going to mount these to kind of straighten out as they go forward, putting this cross member in between them. So I'm just going to take one of these per side on the inner side of the frame and tack it in to fit the bar in between, and then we'll check our angles to make sure it's equal to side, it's not pointing one way or the other. So let's get to tacking this on. now that we got the bar tacked in here on our frame horns, I've got my angle finder with a straight edge, and we're just going to compare side to side. It's just an ever so slight angle. And I adjusted a little bit, now it's dead on nuts, so I'm going to tack it a couple more times to make sure it doesn't move. And then we can move on to throwing that plate on the ground. And we can put our outer plates on with our spacer pipe that goes in here and then skin the top and bottom. Well, we can now start setting up our leading edge, which I'm going to tack this pipe in, and then before I put this outer plate on, I'll have to grind a little off the back to make it match how far it sticks out, because now that we angled them, this side is effectively closer to the back of the car and this side of the rail is effectively forward. So if we take not even an 1/8 inch, maybe a 1/16 off of this one, it'll line up perfect. So we'll tack this in and then get to work to fit in this. We'll bring you in here. You can see that this will be flush out here. This will be set back. And we'll grind these plates down a little bit and then cap the top and the bottom to make a nice transition from the frame to these. And then of course weld this all the way around, weld the new plate to this bar, and we could smooth it all out, and I think it would look pretty good. So I'm going to do the same thing I did on that side, do it to this side, and then we can get to closing it in. I think that turned out pretty good, getting this in here smoothed out. The bar's solid, and now we just need to do the same over here and just tack it at the top, work our way down, get her cleaned up. Then we'll have at least the top side of the frame horns done. I still got to plate the bottom on that side, but we're getting to somewhere. Also, here's what it looks like before we go ahead and clean it up. Got it all welded in, and we got everything set up, so now we can clean it up just like that one. Well, as you can see, we got the body back off the chassis. Now that we got everything fabbed up in the front, now it's time to start working on our trans cross member. So here's another bar I had bent up, and it's just going to go behind the trans mount, which I got a energy suspension poly mount for pretty much any GM vehicle to go in here, because you're going to want to put a soft mount in there. You don't want to rigid mount your trans. Seeing as the engine is solid, there's gonna be flex no matter how stiff your chassis is from the engine back here to the trans. If you solid mount it and a chassis twists, you can break your transmission. So definitely have some sort of a rubber or poly mount just like that. But I've got this rough cut. I'm gonna have to make some adjustments to it, but you can kind of get it set in there, and I've got these couple pieces of angle that will be the sides of the mount. Now once we determine where our cross member is going to go, which is right about here, it's actually going to angle forward a little bit, get it behind the trans mount. Grab my cap off. Mount is going to go approximately right there for the cross member, and now we can figure out where our angles are going to go. Well, it's centered in there, and there are holes in this X-frame for the original trans mount cross member. We're not going to be able to utilize all of them, but we can utilize one, so I'm going to mark that on each side, centering our marks, just like so. All right, we got our initial marks. What I can do, and what I'm going to do next anyway, is go ahead and drill a hole with each one of these so I can bolt it up to the X-frame, and then we can go back and finish grind on our cross member bar here to get it to fit perfectly in between these two end pieces. So I'm going to drill these holes and get them bolted to the chassis. Alright, now we're ready to tack our cross member in, and I got it ground the way I need it. I also beveled the edge of the pipe and cleaned up around it. So we're going to get this in here straight with the trans mount, and I'm also going to throw my angle finder on it and just ensure that we're going to be level. So I'm going to tack one side, and then we can adjust the other side into place once I get this centered. I like that. So I'm going to put a few more tacks on this cross member, and then we'll work on actually getting the carrier for the mount, which is just another piece of angle that'll be gusseted to this bar, and that will carry the weight of our transmission, because with the motor plates there's not going to be a whole lot of weight on here. So I'm going to take a little bit out of it just to have a little pressure in the mount, and then we'll be good. Well, our next step is going to be putting in the actual mount carrier itself, and this will go from the bottom of the mount to the bar. So in order to kind of set up that gap that I want a little bit of weight from the transmission to be forced into this mount, I don't want a whole lot. I took the spacer out for the trans mount, and that way when this is bolted solid, it'll put just a touch of pressure on the mount, so it's not trying to rip the mount out or anything. I mean, it's an 1/8 inch at most. So I'm going to go ahead and tack this into place, and then we can measure it to drill our holes later to go into the mount. Alright, well, we got our cross member completely fabricated. We've got our mount pad on there, got it gusseted so it's not going to go anywhere. And now we need to determine where to drill our holes. Now, this is a trick that I've seen before, and we're just going to take a little grease and put it in the bolt hole for the mount. We're going to slide our cross member in, and this will give us a good idea of where I need to drill my holes. There we go. There and there. And I'm going to put 1/2 inch holes in that just to have a little adjustability. So I'm going to go ahead and drill these, and then the cross member's done, and we can finally blow this frame apart, get the engine and transmission out of here, and just start cleaning things up and finish welding everything. I got to get rid of these old body mount bushings and fix a couple body mount areas, clean it up, weld everything, and then we can move on to paint. All right, we got all the fab done on the top side of the chassis, got all these body mounts patched throughout the chassis, got everything welded up that I can get from the top, because I don't want to lay on my back and have hot welds drip onto me. I took this wheel off, and I'm going to pull the front axle out of the frame and then use the cherry picker to put it up on end so I can get to all the things to finish weld underneath the frame. Well, that should make it easier to get everything I need to get under here. Plus, I can clean it up with the wire brush and finish up small areas like that, finish the shackles and the spring mounts. And once we get that stuff welded in and cleaned up, we can flip it back down and start prepping for paint. Well, we're very close to getting ready to paint this chassis and front axle. There's a couple things I got to do first. And one is to drill the holes for the body mount. So I'm going to grab a 1-inch hole saw and drill those quick. And also I got a bunch of bolts that I'm going to tack to the chassis, and the reason for that is that way when I run brake lines, fuel lines, and my battery cables, I have something to attach it to on the frame. So I'm going to break out the drill and let's pop some holes in and let's buzz some bolts on. Well, the first thing is to determine where our holes need to be. So I have 2 holes left, and I'm just going to measure them from the edge of the body mount and see where they are on center. So about 1.25 inches from the edge. Starts the big process of prepping the chassis for paint. So there's a lot of fingerprints, a lot of oily stuff on here, especially around the ball joints and such, all the holes that I drilled and everything like that. So what I'm gonna do is a little different. Instead of using soap and water or whatever to get this cleaned up, this engine degreaser works pretty good to kind of get that tougher stuff off, and then we'll rinse it off, let it dry, and then come back and wipe it down with mineral spirits. So let's get to spraying this down, and then we can hose it off, make sure we got everything off of the chassis as far as contaminants, and let it wind dry. All right, now we can let that soak in a little bit before bringing the hose in and killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and that is cleaning the chassis off and also cleaning the floor. So let's give this a minute and we'll get her clean. All right, now that the frame is dry and everything's ready to go on our first cleaning, I also scuffed it up with a Scotch-Brite pad. We can go ahead and grab some towels and some mineral spirits here and just go over the frame to get any other impurities out of it. See what we can come up with when we wipe her down. Yeah, she's kind of dirty. Oh, there we go. Now we got her cleaned up, wiped down. Just need to mask a couple things and then we can start mixing paint. All right, well, it's paint mixing time, and probably a good time to tell you that I have no idea what I'm doing. So whatever I do, if it works out great, do exactly that. If it turns out like dog shit, probably don't do that. But I looked up the data sheets on this Rust-Oleum clean metal primer. It also works for light rust. We're going to call that light rust. Now, to spray it, which I've got an HVLP gun that's regulated to just under 30 psi, it calls for a 1-to-1 ratio of paint and thinner, mineral spirits, acetone, something like that. So I've been shaking this for a while. So I figure to do 1 coat, we'll probably need, well, we'll start out pretty much filling a cup because I'm sure we'll use it. And since it's a 1-to-1 ratio, we're not using a whole lot of paint versus the coat itself. Go ahead and drop the lid in the paint there, which always makes everything nice. So let's make ourselves a little dam here. Kind of help with the paint spillage, maybe. And we're gonna fill our cup up to 10 there, whatever that means, I don't know. A little more. There we go. And now, get our paint off. Probably be wise to put gloves on, huh? We'll grab a pair of those. And now, since we got that halfway full, we can fill the other half with our thinner and stir it and see just how poorly this turns out. Yeah. Oh, that spills everywhere, so that's nice. Running down my arm. It's about a 1-to-1 right there. So we'll stir it with this stick I found, because apparently every hardware store I've gone to don't have paint sticks in the paint section, because why the f would you do that? So, whatever. This is going on a frame. Like I said, not going to be perfect, but we're doing the best we can with what we have and very little experience. Nice thing is, I do have lids, so when I fill my cup, I can keep the rest of this. And as far as recoat time, Rust-Oleum lists having a flash time of 10 to 15 minutes in the ambient temperature we're in, which is in between 65, 75, 80 degrees. So get this mixed up. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I've never sprayed with a gun. I've done plenty of like prep work and body work and then rattle canned it. So I've got the basics of body work. It's just so much of spraying out of an actual paint gun that I'm just not used to paint being that thin, I guess. So that should be stirred pretty well. Now, grab ourselves a filter and we'll go ahead and fill our paint cup on the gun. Oh, it actually all fits. Okay. Get this twisted on, and we're about ready to paint. I don't want that to tip over. So, I do know when it comes to painting, proper PPE is a good idea. So we're going to do just that. Because at least if we're being stupid, we're being safe about it. So, I'll get you guys set up. And we'll go ahead and squirt some color on this, see how it works out. I kind of got the gun set up to where I think it should be. So, let's make bad things happen. Well, I think I'm getting the hang of it. I'm going to mix up 2 cups of paint. That seems like 1 cup doesn't quite get the whole frame done. As you can see, I got a run or two there. I'm still figuring it out, but with it being this thin, I got slight coats of key, so let's keep going. Well, it's definitely doing something. So another 15-minute flash time, and we can put probably the last coat on. Go a little heavier. I'm going to tighten my fanning even more, and we'll lay it on. I might let this one go 20 minutes. You know, it says not to, so I'll do that. And then we can kind of lay a heavier coat on this, because this is going to have to sit for 24 hours before I top coat it. Now, if we don't get the coverage I want with the primer, hardware store is just down the road. I can grab another can of primer if they have it and finish this up well within a 15-minute flash time. So I'm going to take a break. Well, we got the final coat of primer on, and I used what was left of my primer, which was about half a cup, to kind of touch up spots, get stuff that I missed, and it looks pretty good considering, yeah, it's really my first time working with an HVLP gun. I've got a couple runs here and there, but the outside of the frame looks pretty good. There's some tight areas I really couldn't get into with the spray gun, so let me turn off the air compressor here. So what I'm gonna do when I go to top coat this, which will be in 24 hours, I can top coat this with the gloss, is I'm going to get a rattle can of the same stuff. Make sure it's, you know, the same oil-based enamel. And then I can go in there and kind of get in the tight spots before I lay the overall coat. Now, I think it looks pretty good, and I think this is going to look really good when it's got a gloss on it. And I figured out this guy here, got my fan adjustment down. I've got mineral spirits in it right now, just kind of eating away at stuff and spraying it out, getting it past the fluid tip and everything, and I'll take it apart and clean it properly before we top coat. So that being said, I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to clean up, rinse the floor back down, and we will see you guys tomorrow when we top coat this. Well, we're reaching the finish line finally on this chassis build. First thing, now that the paint's cured, is to give it a little scuff. I'm going to knock down some of the highs and lows, not get too deep into it. So I'm going to scuff it up quick so the final coat or the top coat can bite into this, and then we're going to clean it. So let's get to the scuffing this up a little better. Don't have to go too crazy. Just enough to give it a little bit of a bite, but that's it. Well, I went ahead, got it scuffed up, and then I blew it off with my air nozzle. And of course, a critical part of any paint job, no matter what step you're in, whenever you're gonna lay paint over something like this that's dry or something that is bare, you can see if I rub my glove, it's dirty. You wouldn't want to lay paint over this, even though I blew it off. So I'm going to use an organic cleaner, because obviously putting acetone or mineral spirits on this will just take the paint off. So glass cleaner works pretty good, and we'll just go over the whole piece that we're going to paint and clean it up. You can see, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a little bit of brown on there, so we did have some contamination on the surface, so you definitely want to get rid of that before you continue to lay paint. So I'm going to clean this up, then we can get to mixing the top coat and laying that on, using some of the things I learned yesterday to maybe not try to have all the paint run right off of it or blow right by it. So I'm going to continue on this to check in with you in a minute. Okay, so we're ready to start mixing our paint, and I've got this gloss white Rust-Oleum that I'm going to use for a top coat. Everything I've looked at pretty much calls for a 2/3 ratio almost, so 2 parts thinner, 3 parts paint. So I went ahead and put 8 ounces in here, and I'm going to thin it just a little more than that, because if you remember, the primer was a 1-to-1 ratio. This is not. So we'll go 8 ounces of thinner and then run it up to 20 ounces of paint, because that's what fits in my cup. And I'm just using, again, odorless mineral spirits, which kind of a misnomer, honestly, because it says odorless, and it's really not all that odorless. Also, too, I can now hear the color 9, so this ought to make painting a breeze. So let's get some actual color in this cup before I pass out. Make a big old mess because, you know, why not? $20 ounces. Also, too, I learned something from yesterday. I got another can of paint because I was in a rush and I was afraid I was going to run out of primer, and I used every drop of it. So I'm going to mix up a few of these so I can just keep dumping into the cup. So that being said, I'm going to mix these up. We'll catch back with you when we're laying it down. All right, so we're getting ready to lay the color, or top coat. It's already white, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to test it on my tarp there just to make sure my fan's the same, my fluid's the same from yesterday, because I did take the gun apart and clean it. So we'll just double check that and we'll start laying it down. So remember, PPE is a must. Well, that's the first coat down, and I got a little happy on this side. There's a couple of rungs, so I backed off a bit, moved a little bit quicker, just kind of learning the gun and everything, and learning this paint. So I'm glad I'm 2 in the frame before I paint anything that really matters. So I'm gonna let this flash off for 15 minutes, then we can slap the next coat on, another light coat, lighter than what I just did. And then we can keep going, and I'm just going to keep laying light coats with the proper flash time until it looks good. It's nice and thick. So I see I missed an area right there, so I'm going to hit that quick, and we'll keep back at it. Well, it's been 15 minutes. We're ready to lay down the second coat. And the key is, when you're talking flash times to any paint, is to wait. And I hate waiting. So I found something to do in the meantime. Is when I finish the coat that I can get at with the actual HVLP gun, I go in with the same Rust-Oleum paint and a spray can to get the tight areas that I can't get the gun into. So that helps kill the time in between. So, yes, that being said, let's put the next coat on. second coat's done. So I figured one more light to medium coat, and then we'll put a medium coat on it, medium to heavy, giving us 4 coats of paint on this. So I'm gonna grab the spray can, hit the areas I couldn't get with the gun, and we'll catch up with you when we're finishing this up. Well, we got the final coat of paint on, medium to heavy coat. It looks pretty good. There's a couple of runs here and there, but I'm gonna leave it. Like I said, this is my first time operating an actual paint gun, and it's a frame. I learned a lot, and you know, next thing we kind of throw color or clear at will be that car. So again, since I'm just clearing most of the body work after I clean it up a little bit, we can really fine tune our spray patterns and everything like that. And of course, having a bigger surface that I'm not doing this with a paint gun trying to get everything will be a lot nicer. So I'm gonna let this sit for about 2 to 3 hours, and then we'll reassemble it and get a good look at it out in the sun, and then wrap up this video. So I'll see you guys, well, like that. Well, we got the frame assembled and out in the sunshine, and I gotta say, it looks pretty good. Now, seeing where we're at now, let's have a look at where we started. This was the front section of the frame, and as you could see, it wasn't good. I didn't have to cut that off. I just grabbed it and pulled it off. You can see it's completely rotted there. Just really, really bad. And of course, this had independent front suspension, rear steer, all that. Got rid of it. Got it looking really good. Cross members in, the motor plate, mid plate in. Got the steering box bolted on. All it needs is the rest of the steering and shocks. And this is ready to go, but I think it turned out pretty good. Well, and there we have it. The chassis is completely painted. It's ready to go aside from the steering linkage and shocks, and it's all ready for us to put the body back on it and actually get somewhere. And like you could see, the old chassis was what I had to deal with, and why I went through so much work to build this chassis with what I could salvage from the original. And I've got probably 40 hours in fabricating this frame, and I'm not a professional fabricator. I just took my time and got the advice of people that are a lot smarter than me when it comes to welding and things like that. And well, this just means that you could do the same thing with a little bit of room and a lot of time, just taking your time and doing the very best you can and getting advice from those that you know have the skills. You can always learn them yourself. So that being said, the chassis is done. We don't have to deal with that anymore. Next thing coming up for the checker gasser project is we're going to get floor pans in it, get that buttoned up, convert it to manual brakes, and get the steering column and everything in it. But probably the next piece of content you'll see from me, seeing as we're really rolling up on Power Tour, is some visual upgrades for the Challenger, something to make it look different than every other Challenger on the road. You know, something a little more classy, harken back to the real old muscle car era. So stay tuned for that. And thanks for sticking around throughout this entire project. I actually am really happy with how everything turned out, being at my first time fabricating something like this, my first time spraying paint out of a gun. I always sprayed out of a spray can, always had good results, and it's a big difference shooting it out of a gun. It's a learning curve, and I learned a lot, so that'll help me when I go to lay the clear on the car. Now, if you want to see how this chassis started, go ahead and go back through all my playlists. I have one for every project, and go ahead and check out the Checker Gasser playlist, and you can see how this frame started to where it is now. And you know, of course, you can find all kinds of stuff on this channel. You can find me at Facebook at T.N.T. Garage and Performance, and on Instagram at T.N.T. Garage and Performance. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Go ahead and comment down below. And, well, until next time, remember, if it ain't broke, fix it till it is. We'll see you soon.